I think he just stepped out from Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me well? Okay, voy a hacer una pregunta. ¿Hay alguien aquí que necesita traducción en español para esta junta? Otra vez le voy a preguntar si hay alguien aquí en esta junta que va a necesitar traducción en español. Okay. I didn't hear anybody, so we're going to go ahead and proceed with the meeting in English. Thank you all once again for coming. My name is Bill Drew. I'm the Chief of Staff for Alderwoman Julia Ramirez of the 12th Ward. And thank you all for being here on this summer evening. I just want to make sure that we can all are all comfortable, we're all settled in, and we all have an agenda for today's program. So we're going to skip the UIC streetscape recommendations because they won't be joining us today, but we do have poster boards here from what they have come up with. These are ideas for improving 35th Street from a design perspective. And so I'll have Kate talk more about that, but first I want to make sure that we introduce Alderwoman Ramirez, who is here tonight to do the welcome. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Alderwoman Lee will not be here tonight, but she will have somebody from her staff speaking. But I want you guys to know that Alderwoman Lee and I have been working very closely. She is a wonderful seatmate. We've been very communicative throughout this process. I'm very grateful for my Chief of Staff, Bill, who has a really great and thoughtful presentation. There's a lot of history of why we're in the position we're in, and we have to ask why and how that's impacted our communities for so long. So I'm really excited for this type of change, and we just want to make sure that it's the change that's appropriate for the residents of McKinley Park, right? We want to make sure that we protect, what is McKinley Park and specifically its residents. So please, think about sort of like impact, ask questions. I do encourage everyone, I know the meeting has started, but afterwards, definitely take a look at the boards. Because as we're thinking about the zoning, thankfully MPDC has kind of, allowed us to imagine what the zoning can possibly bring. And so that's really encouraging, really positive. So thank you so much. And I really want to thank also Omar from DPD. He's also here with us tonight. And that is the Department of Planning and Development. And so I'm glad that he's here so he can also answer some questions. But thank you so much. And I hope you guys enjoy tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carlos Diaz. I'm the Chief of Staff for Alderwoman Nicole Lee. Thank you, Kate. Firstly, she'd like to apologize for not being here in person. She will be signing on at some point so she will be here if there's any questions for her. Yeah, I don't want to hold up the presentation, so let's go to it. Billy?
Then we're just going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the McKinley Park Development Council, so that you can hear from themselves about all the great work that they've been doing and how they've kind of initiated this with some of the projects that they've been working on. So I'm going to invite Kate to come up and speak, and who's here representing the Development Council. Kate?
Hi there. So I'm Kate. I'm the president of McKinley Park Development Council, and I am not the only person here representing the council here. If you want to talk to someone after this meeting about what we do, can I ask all the board members to please raise your hand? Any of these people can tell you about the work that we're doing here in the neighborhood. Thanks, guys. So, a couple of things. I want to point out that we got here tonight through a process that has been going on for years. And I'm saying that to be encouraging and not discouraging, although I also don't want to overpromise. You know, we're going to get stuff done, and it's going to be a road, though. And it's when we need everybody here together to make that happen. So it's a thank you all for coming out. Part of our role at MPDC is to facilitate public comment, to make sure we are in the information business. And we want everyone to know what's going on, how you can get involved, to make sure that the information that you're getting is accurate, and to do what we can to provide a forum for the general public to weigh in on things that are happening here. So that's a big deal. Tonight's meeting specifically is a result of a couple of things that have been going on for a long time. The first one is the McKinley Park Neighborhood Plan, which lays out a variety of criteria for what neighbors want to see in McKinley Park. Over 800 neighbors were part of building this plan. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you, there's a paper copy over here. Don't take off with it, but please feel free to flip through during or after the meeting. It is also available on our website, McKinley Park Development Council, in full color. And you can see all the things that have been planned out by us in cooperation with Chicago Metropolitan Planning. And that includes things like making the neighborhood more inclusive, making the things we have in the neighborhood reflective of the people who live here, making our neighborhood more walkable and bikeable, and bringing in basic amenities, everyday stuff that people want to have. So from there, we're like, well, this is a really big plan, and we're a small group of volunteers. So what do you do with that? You ask for help. So last year, we went to UIC Urban Planning and said, can you help us? Because we need to do something with this. And it's 200 pages of things that neighbors want to have. And so the last 2 summers, UIC Urban Planning has given us the invaluable presence of their graduate students' capstone course in urban planning and city design. So you may have seen some of those students running around here around Memorial Day. They were in the park, they were at the parade. We had events at a couple of places on 35th Street and over at Bethany Church. Some of you may have come to those events. So with all of that feedback, we ended up with a couple of things that you'll see on the posters here. And again, I'm not going to go super in depth because we really do want to get to the zoning piece, but to point out why it's important and how it fits into the big picture. So the big picture for our planning efforts in terms of our physical space and neighborhood amenities is right over there in that poster with the 3 circles on it. Those are 3 primary areas of interest for improvements and revitalization in the neighborhood. That is 35th Street, the area around the 35th Archer L, and the Central Manufacturing District. So take a look at that. That was the end result of last year's project, and there were some recommendations made by UIC. At the end of this year's project, they've made some suggestions. Zoning is at the top of the list. This year we spent the entire summer just looking at 35th Street with our friends from UIC. So 35th Street, there's a lot of layers of things that happen. We have vacant storefronts, right? Why do we have vacant storefronts? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. One is that in 2004, right? The whole area was downzoned in an effort to send commercial traffic to Bridgeport. Therefore, those storefronts are zoned residential. In other words, you can live in a storefront, but you can't open a business in it. And of course, not every landlord was willing to make that conversion because it was expensive and it wasn't what they bought the building to do. And not every business had the wherewithal to push through a zoning change to be able to get anyone else to move so that they could open a business in that space, all right? So there's a lot of players going to be involved here, and tonight we're here to look at the legal issues, the zoning, which is the first step in getting this thing to move, all right? So I'm going to let the wards present what they've come up with on that. This is their meeting. But I also want to frame a little bit about what happens outside of this. Because in order to get people to those small businesses once we have them, for example, we need transportation, right? There are things that people would like to see, like sidewalk cafes, which means you need wider sidewalks. People would like to see bike lanes. And I realize that every time we talk about bike lanes, people say, that's great, but where's my parking? So we need to find a way for those things to coexist, especially on 35th Street, because it is the only way east-west in and out of the neighborhood, because you cannot leave the neighborhood unless you can get across Bubbly Creek, right? So we have to deal with the reality that everyone on two wheels, four, on foot, on a horse, doesn't matter, needs to cross 35th Street over Bubbly Creek, and therefore we have to have appropriate traffic lanes for that. So there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it. We are already starting the conversation with CDOT, early stages, please, it's gonna take a little while, about getting some of those improvements in, but this stuff is all gonna play together. So I wanna point out the couple of ideas that UIC has offered us and consider how the conversation that we're having tonight about opening storefronts could make some of these other things more feasible. So for example, this is an idea here about turning the intersection that we are sitting on, 35th and Wolcott, into a social hub. That we could have street fairs right out here in front of the library and in front of the play garden. That we could repurpose part of the Walgreens parking lot to have things like a farmer's market, or a tamale fest, or live music, or what have you. Also, in pedestrian improvements, you've seen a lot of tree planting around. Like all of these things that are gonna make our area more environmentally and socially resilient, and also, frankly, it's hot out there. Don't you want to sit under a tree if you're going to be outside in August? Right. So those are some uses. Also, public art, right? So that's one set of things. So think about the kinds of businesses that could support that kind of activity, and what you might want to see on 35th Street can make those other things more feasible. So you've got two other ideas over here. And this one is at the one intersection down, or a couple of intersections down, sorry, at 35th and Wood. Looking at seasonality, right? When it snows, you do need that parking lot because everyone's miserable and they want to drive. When it's nice outside, you want to walk, right? So what are some things you can do with that? And they're looking at things like having pop-up play areas in the school parking lot when school is out. Which makes sense, because you need places to take your kids and keep them entertained, and this is something that can adapt according to the weather. We're looking at activating alleyways with art. That could go alongside some of the environmental improvements with permeable surfaces to prevent the flooding that we have been having this summer. And just looking at more outdoor seating areas, places to sit and have a conversation with your friend, whether that is part of a business or part of park space. So different ideas about how to use green space and how to integrate it into what we already have, how to activate spaces that we already have. And then over here, and I realize this might be hard for some of you over inside, so the portal being the L, right? That's how you arrive in the neighborhood, how many people see McKinley Park for the first time. That 6 Points intersection at 35th and Archer and Damon, it sucks, right? I don't think anybody's gonna argue with that. It's a gauntlet if you're on foot. And so looking at some ways that we can change the streetscaping to make that safer for pedestrians and to prevent accidents with the way that the physical space is arranged. Also looking at the alley, so the CTA parking lot behind the Family Dollar, next to the L, looking at ways that maybe we could revitalize that space so that you could walk from the L to 35th Street without having to go down Archer. For one thing, it's shorter, but it's really not inviting. So what could we do there? Could we set it up for street vendors? Could we have murals? Could we again have like permeable surfaces, have a Sunday market? What can we do to activate the spaces that we already have? All right, we are blessed with a lot of commercial space in this neighborhood and so much opportunity to do things with it. So as you listen to this presentation tonight about zoning, think about the things that you want to see on 35th that we don't have yet. Do you want to see a community center? Do you want to see a place, a pet store? Do you want to see a coffee shop? Do you want to see other forms of gathering places, a bookstore, restaurants? Think about all of that as we're having this conversation. And I really would love to hear from all of you what's on your mind, and all of this is going to go into account into what we do next. For any of you, again, who want to look at paper copies of things, we do have the paper copy of the neighborhood plan and a short booklet about 35th Street work done by UIC. And our mailing list is in the back if you'd like to sign up to receive more information about the things that McKinley Park Development Council is doing in the neighborhood. So with that, I'll hand it back. And a big, big thank you to both boards for cooperating to make this happen tonight.
Thank you, Kate. So I just wanted to make sure everybody who walked in got an agenda for today. This is also a comment card, so you can leave feedback on this meeting and what you think about the rezoning proposal. So Esme has some in the back. This is actually our first ward's community meeting, and we're committed to having a community-driven zoning process, which is why feedback is so important to making these decisions that will impact generations to come, right? Because when you make zoning changes, you're essentially changing what can be allowed as of right development without any special permission from the local alderperson, which is how things work in Chicago. So just a little bit about myself. Once again, my name is Bill Drew. I'm the Chief of Staff for Alderwoman Julia Ramirez. A little bit about my background. I actually worked for the city for about 6.5 years with Alderman Carlos Rosa in the 35th Ward on the northwest side, who is now the chair of the zoning committee. And we had a very robust community-driven process, one that's been recognized as a model for inclusive development. And so we're actually in the process of modeling that. We're almost done with our procedures and guidelines document, which is how we will be conducting all of our meetings and reviewing zoning changes in the ward. So that will be up shortly on our website, so be sure to look that up. We have contact information for our new office, which is at the corner of Rockwell, Archer, and Pershing. So we're really excited. We'll also be doing a grand opening soon. So we'll be sure to send out all that information. As long as you put your email address down, we'll be able to get in contact with you. So let me jump right in then to this presentation here. Oh, and also my background is in urban planning as well. So I got my master's from UIC urban planning, which were the students who did this work here. So basically, this is the map, the existing zoning map of the ward, of both wards, rather the ward boundaries of the 11th ward and the 12th ward. And it's split up. 35th Street on the north side is the 11th ward. Sorry, you all see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So the north side of 35th Street is the 11th ward. The south side is the 12th ward for the most part. So that's really why we have the 11th ward here, because we're going to work together. So just a little bit of background as well. You might have seen these orange posters that were posted all along 35th Street. That was because the former 12th ward alderperson Annabella Barca put in a zoning change request, and that was submitted as an ordinance, and that's what triggered the notification to change 35th Street to a uniform B2-3 zoning district. And we'll get into the nuts and bolts. Zoning is very complicated. There's a lot to understand in terms of what that actually means. So we're gonna jump right in and kind of dig deep as to what that is. So what is a zoning district and how does zoning districts work? So hopefully you can see that. Sorry, it's a little small. but all properties in Chicago, they fall within what's called the zoning district. And they're grouped into broad categories: residential, business, manufacturing. One example is the B1-1 neighborhood zoning district. And what is that? That's exactly, essentially it's a retail storefront on low traffic streets with apartments allowed on above the ground, right? So zoning is about land use, what you can do with your property, the density, and how big the building can be. So the B1 piece, so that's the first part of the designation, captures the land use part, right? So what can you do? What can you do inside that property, inside that building? And so the ordinance lists every business that isn't allowed in the B1 district. It's a very long list, and we're actually going to go through that list. They all have their names as well: neighborhood mixed use, community shopping. That's what B3 is. Now the -1, that's the second part of the zoning. It's a very important piece of the designation, and that's what captures the density, right? How much can be built on that parcel of land? What is the density and bulk requirements? That's something that you're going to see a lot and hear a lot about it. Essentially, how big the building can be, how tall it can be, the floor area ratio, which is can be a complicated term, but we're going to try to explain all of that. So the larger the number after the hyphen determines how dense that building can be. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 will be scaled up to how big that can be, right? Next slide. So this is the existing zoning map of 35th Street from Levitt to Ashland. Levitt is where the orange line is at, and Ashland is more or less where our shopping district ends, our commercial corridor rather. So as Kate mentioned, it was downzoned. This part of 35th Street was downzoned by the former 11th Ward Alderman James Balser in 2004. I think she pointed out correctly, 35th Street, it is largely residential as it is right now. I think there was a motive to drive most of that commercial shopping to Bridgeport to benefit those businesses. So as you can see here, the yellow, that light yellow beige color, that's an RS3 district, which means it's a single family home. That's all you could build there. And there is some business districts, so you can see these little bits and pieces here. Those were essentially what are called spot zones, meaning there was a person, either the building owner or the business owner, that went in and had to go through what's called a zoning change to essentially open their business. You can see, we'll zoom in closer to see some examples, but that's a very expensive thing to do. It costs upwards up to $10,000, and it's not a guarantee. You have to go to the local alderman to get their support, alderwoman to get their support, and so it's very expensive for a small business to have to go through that legal hurdle. So that's why we're here today. We want to make sure that we do things to allow for small businesses to open up, so they don't have to go through that process, that costly process. Next slide. So as you can see here, these are some examples of the building types that are on 35th Street. It's majority 1 and 2 story residential buildings with some mixed use, right? So the mixed use means a mix of residential and a mix of commercial. So as you can see here at the top, right here at the corner of 35th and Walcott, you see some of these small businesses, personal services like a dentist office, barber shop, restaurant, with residential above, right? So I think this is what you would call the classic Main Street feel. Back in the day, the mom and pop businesses would actually live above their storefronts and then tend to their stores during the day, and then go upstairs where they would live, right? I'm not sure if there's still examples of that. I'm sure that these are now, being rented out. But there's also some single-family homes, as you can see here at the bottom. And they're actually very nice brick architecture built in the early 1900s. And it's a very nice feel, I think, and it makes the neighborhood more walkable if you have these businesses and that are, you know, accessible to the neighborhood. Right. Welcome. So this is the corner of Sealy and 35th, looking east. This is where I think we have the most popular restaurant in the neighborhood, Chile Toreado. I love eating there. And you know, and it's actually in what's a B3-2 district. I believe they went and got a zoning change, or the former restaurant that was there went and got a zoning change to allow for them to open. If you've ever been in there, they have a nice little bar in the front of their kitchen, and the B3 allows them to continue to use that. If it were a B2, they would not be able to use that. So they actually have a sit-down bar, and they don't have a tavern license, but they are able to sell liquor. And that's because they have what's called an incidental license, right? So I'll get more into the nuance of that. There's different types of liquor licenses, but the incidental liquor license is what allows for restaurants to serve liquor. And if they have the B3, they can serve liquor with a full-size bar. You know, they wouldn't be operating as a tavern, but you know, they can actually serve drinks with the food. You know, you see a lot of restaurants are able to succeed by offering that as a destination, and you know, because of that incidental license, they're restricted to having their sales be you know, majority food sales. They can't, if they exceed their food sales with alcohol sales, then the city will actually come and send them a notice saying that they can't be operating like that. So it's a way to sort of manage that for businesses that are trying to go outside of the liquor moratorium tavern designation, because to get a tavern license, you know, you have to go through the alderman again, and sometimes there's these moratoriums where you're not able to get the license. So this is a way in which kind of prevents that that loophole. But we'll get more into that. I think there is a desire to see a little bit more nightlife, some destinations, places where you can get a drink on 35th Street. Next slide. This is just a list of some of the active business licenses on 35th Street, at least in the 12th Ward portion, which is the south side of the street. As you can see, there's not a lot of businesses. You see Chile Toreado, they have the retail food establishment license, which allows them to operate as a restaurant, and then they have what's called the incidental consumption on premise license, which is what I was just referring to earlier. We have a great new music school. We have a few more restaurants. So I think we're kind of stitching together a lot of different types of businesses. And hopefully with this rezoning, we're able to allow for more businesses to open up in some of the vacant storefronts that we're seeing on 35th Street right now. So this is what I was alluding to earlier, the B3-2 designation that was spot zoned for Chile Toreado, as well as the south side of 35th Street here. And it's really, I think, allowing a lot of these businesses to open. The B3 really allows for the most business type uses. It's similar to the B2, but there's just a few more different types of businesses that are allowed under the 3. And as you can see, the other side of the street, which is actually the Freddy's Hair Studio and the restaurant supply company, they're actually zoned RS3, which is for single family homes. So clearly that's not the use that's there. It was downzoned, and this restaurant supply store actually used to be a theater. It actually used to be a theater back in the day, where you would go with, I think it was called the Archer Theater. The building, you can see it has like a barrel roof in the back. It's actually really quite large. And so I'm sure sometime, you know, in the 80s or 90s, it was converted to this type of a business. So you can see that, you know, 35th Street was a bustling street with a lot of different types of businesses, you know, when there were probably more people in the neighborhood, and when the zoning was, you know, correct, right? So hopefully we're gonna be able to correct that. So this is something that I was alluding to earlier as far as the restaurant startup guide. This is what the city has as far as what's allowed and what's not allowed. So as you can see, there's something that's called a limited restaurant, which has no sit-down bar allowed, and then the general restaurant, which allows for a sit-down bar, and that's only with the B3 and the C districts. If you were to want to open up a tavern, a bar, a full-on bar with no food, you would need at least a B3, and as you can see, there's a little asterisk. That means that you need to get a special use on top of that, right? So a special use is actually something that the alderman does not necessarily have to, you do not have to get the support of the alderman, but it is something that benefits you. You go before what's called the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is supposed to be an independent body from the city council, and they review matters such as special uses, like a tavern that wants to open up in a B3 district, or different variances when it comes to construction of a building that maybe go beyond that second part, which is the density component. So the Zoning Board of Appeals, I think it's important that we make that distinction because there are things that can be, as of right, but then there is still that designation where they have to go through and get a special use, and then they may not be in the, something that the alderman can control. So, like I mentioned earlier, there is a moratorium on the some of the two big license types when it comes to liquor, and that is the packaged goods license, which is what Jewel has or a liquor store has, and that's a license to be able to sell alcohol to go in package form. As you can see here on Archer, the green is actually packaged goods. So this portion of Archer here, it only has red, meaning the packaged good moratorium was lifted when Cermak Produce got a liquor license to be able to sell liquor. So it wasn't until recently they were able to sell alcohol, and they had to do that through they had to get the alderman support. The alderman had to lift the moratorium. That was under former 12-4 Alderman George Cartmouse, right? So this portion of Archer isn't covered, but it is covered with the red, which is the tavern moratorium, right? So no bars can open up, no new bars can open up, or licenses can open up on Archer or actually anywhere really in the neighborhood because they're both covered, all right? And so if a bar were to come in and want to try to open, they would have to go through the alderman, and I think it's our commitment that we would go through a zoning process or a community-driven zoning process like this to consider whether or not we want to lift that moratorium. Slide. So this is, in my opinion, my personal opinion, I think is a stretch, a commercial stretch that we would like to see on 35th Street, that I would like to see on 35th Street. And this is 18th Street from Paulina to Wood. As you can see, there's a lot of activity on the street. There's a lot of storefronts that are active. And this portion of 18th Street actually is where Pochos relocated. Y'all remember Pochos?
Yeah,
right. So they were probably the #1 restaurant in the neighborhood. They left. Allegedly there was just not a good relationship with the landlord, and they relocated to 18th Street where they're doing really well. And a lot of 18th Street is actually B3-2. It's consistently B3-2. And as you can see, there's apartments above. It's a healthy mixed use of residential and commercial. And I think that, something like this, a zoning designation like this would definitely benefit 35th Street, at least for the vacant storefronts. Did you have a question?
So just to
clarify exactly what you can build in B3-2. We're talking about ground floor commercial up to 3 stories. Is that correct?
Correct. And actually, we do have somebody here from DPD who I'm sure is more well-versed, as well as Alderwoman Lee, actually, who just walked in. But I think we can, for questions, for specific questions like that, I'm gonna refer to Omar from DPD who can answer some of those questions for us. Because I know there is also some concern about whether or not the residential single-family homes will be conforming under the B3-2. We don't want to make it difficult for them to, pull permits or whatever. So we want to make sure that, we're being friendly to business, welcoming to business, but also making sure that the residents that live there, we're not making it more difficult for them. So this is what I was referring to earlier, the B3-2, which is consistent along 18th Street from Paulina to Wood. And this is an example of a sleepy corner on 35th Street, Paulina and Hermitage. From Paulina to Hermitage, this is actually Hermitage. And this is, actually no, this is Paulina. This is, what used to be a corner store. It's now vacant. You actually see a lot of former commercial storefronts converted to residential. They've been converted to apartments, and when that happens, it's very difficult for them to change back to commercial. So this is that chart that I was referring to earlier, the zoning districts and the breakdown exactly of what is permitted, which is the P, and specifically comparing the B2 and the B3, and what would require a special use, right? So it's not to say that something like a townhouse isn't permitted in the B3. They would just need to go through the special use process. That's what the Zoning Board of Appeals is for. They'll go before the board. There's actually an ordinance to lower that application fee from $1,000 to $500. And so they would have to pay a $500 application fee, go before the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals will review their application, their development proposal, and they would determine whether or not they would approve that special use. And the letter of support from the alderman is not required for that, so they won't have to go through a community process per se, or get the blessing of the alderman, right? Next slide. And then this is the very extensive list, and you can go down, and actually we'll put these slides up so you can look at it exactly, but I just wanted to highlight what I was referring to earlier between the restaurant limited and the restaurant general distinction, which the restaurant general, which is a little bit bigger, which allows for that sit-down bar, would not be permitted under the B2, but is permitted under the B3. And this is just a longer list. You can go back to and look on your own. I won't get it. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's basically what the gist of it is. And then this is a breakdown of the bulk and density, which is the second part of that designation, the different dash types, and the maximum floor area ratio, which you can do. I think there's a big difference here between the dash 2 and the dash 3, which the dash 3 would allow for a four-story building, which I don't think would necessarily be appropriate for 35th Street. We don't have anything really above 3 stories. I think 3 is what I think would be the limit. I think that still allows for density, but a gentle density that doesn't necessarily overwhelm the streetscape, right, or overshadow different buildings. And I'm going to point to some examples of some B2-3s that just look out of character, and I don't think we would necessarily want to see that. I don't think we want to necessarily start to open the floodgates for something like gentrification, right, where we see large-scale developments happening that are really only for the interest of high-end real estate and profit rather than providing, affordable housing, which is something I think we need. So, go to the next slide. This is just another boring chart, so we can just skip that. And so this is what I was talking about. This is two developments that are near the corner of Belmont and Kimball in Avondale neighborhood, which is a very hot real estate market. And these actually went through zoning changes, and they were seeking the B2-3. And in my opinion, they just are out of scale of what was already there, and they don't have affordable housing included in that. So I don't think that this was under the B2-3, which was the designation proposed for 35th Street by the former alderman Annabella Barca. So I think that it's good that we're having this conversation, and we want to hear from you all. So we've allowed for 20 minutes for public comment and questions at the end of this meeting, so that we can hear exactly what you all think of some of this. I know it's a lot of information. I know it's kind of overwhelming, but hopefully, we can start to have these conversations and make a very informed decision about what should be allowed on 35th Street, because it is going to impact generations to come. That's it for me. So we had designated 10 minutes for the UIC students to come, but unfortunately they weren't able to make it. So now we're just going to jump right into the public comment and questions. I think if we want to do it in an organized fashion, if we want to have folks line up right here, and then we can, you can ask your question or provide a comment. We want to limit it to 2 minutes so that everybody has the time to ask a question or provide comment if they would like. So if you could just start to line up single file over here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you just want to say your name, where you live, and then.
Hello everybody, my name is Erika Montenegro. I live right on this block. And I wanted to ask, I know that there was a section that we were going to listen to UIC recommendations for zoning, and I just wanted to get clarity as far as, B2-3. Is there anything that, my understanding is the fees and the higher the numbers, the more flexibility it provides, but does it make it that it's mandated to be a business if it has that mixed use zone? And that's one of the things that I wanted to understand as far as, that we do have a lot of residential houses down 35th Street, and if we do a general zoning for the entire 35th Street corridor, is that going to then, force houses or landowners in that particular area that they have to now have a business or storefront? I didn't understand that.
Omar, do you want to answer that question for us? So, I guess the question is, if it's changed to a B district, does that mean that now the single-family house is non-conforming, or they can't make changes to the building or pull permits?
No. So if there's a rezoning to a B3, for example, a house or two flat would become what's considered non-conforming, and you couldn't build a new one by right, but existing homes would not be forced to be converted into their use or wouldn't have to be demolished. You can still pull permits to renovate your house. It wouldn't cause any issues like that. The B2 zoning does allow single-family homes by right as well, and that actually is meant to give some more flexibility on commercial corridors where there might not be as much demand for a whole block of businesses.
And has to be one or the other, like B2 or B3, or is there a combination option?
So for each particular property will have only one zoning. As far as the whole corridor goes, there could be a mix of B2 and B3.
And if I can just add, just to be clear, if you have a single family home right now in this zone and it's upzoned to B3-2, everything that he said, But if you, let's say, wanted to knock down the house and put up a commercial building, you could within that zoning. I just wanted to give you the flip side of that.
And then also just Omar's a planner from the Department of Planning and Development. We're very well versed, so that's why we have him here.
Thanks for doing this. It's really nice, because when I saw the notification that there's gonna be a zoning change, it's like, no one asked me, I own a building on this block. So, my name's Dave, I live on 1750 West 35th Street, so I'm directly impacted by any zoning changes. So I'm very interested about the next question, what are the tax implications for my building, because it's already high, and I love that you brought up the 18th Street as like, oh wow, this is so vibrant. I've been hearing stories left and right from people that get priced out of their homes because of property taxes. They paid $5,000 for years or decades, and now they pay $22,000 in taxes. So gentrification is a thing, yeah. And I think that would be a great piece to add to all of this, because I love all of this. But I think there's no one in here that loves taxes. So if there's any way that we can incorporate that, that would be fantastic. I don't know what it's gonna look like, because I just personally feel like the property taxes are more like roll of the dice and see this property is gonna 11,000 this time around. I don't know, it's just a little bit willful. It's really hard to understand. And I'm just worried what's gonna be next. Okay, now it's a commercially zoned. Yes, you can have your single family or two flat out of two flat at this point. But I don't want to pay $15,000 for my property just because I could build I don't know, a commercial property.
Thanks for the question, and I'm sure any property owner along here is gonna be concerned about that. I don't wanna answer for the assessor, so I think let us take that question to the Cook County assessor and just throw that to him and ask him to give us a response on that. I think it's a very legitimate concern at the end of the day. I want to pose a question to Omar, because this came up in conversation previously. There are a good number of strictly residential properties along 35th Street. What would it look like if we were to, let's say, any property that has ground floor commercial on it, apply the upzone to B3-2, and then leave the remaining properties alone as residential designations? Is that something that we can do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
No, to answer your question, Alderwoman, that's something we could do, and I think that would be appropriate.
Like an opt-in break or opt-out. There's a blanket statement like you're all.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think personally, I don't think that it's necessarily appropriate to do a blanket, especially given how much residential, like strictly residential,
Right.
Single family residential, multifamily residential. It's not like an old building that had ground floor commercial that was converted into residential. So we don't want to, we're trying to help, not hurt. So this is why these conversations are so great. So I think, we're open to this exact conversation.
And I fully understand the reasons
Yeah.
why it's happening, but like the other question I had is like, what is the percentage of actual properties that would need that? Like, still have a storefront that is ready, because my storefront was converted like 30 years ago. It costs probably less to just keep it in residential.
It's fair. Yeah. Kate?
So on this point, I want to be really clear that, our goal here as a development council, while we want to see storefronts revitalized, we are absolutely not interested in putting anyone out of their home. Our highest priority is to provide things that residents need, and that certainly includes the place that they live. All right. So this is a critical piece, and in fact, when we brought this to the wards, that was one of the things. They said, yes, let's have restaurants, and we're like, wait, somebody's living there. So it is a very, very important consideration. And I also want to note that when these zoning things go forward, even if, they're going to the wards are going to take this back and they're going to develop a more detailed proposal with DPD. Once the zoning stuff gets announced, there will be another opportunity for homeowners especially for anybody who owns a building and for neighbors in general, to have their say. You also have the opportunity to speak in front of the zoning board if something gets that far before you get your way. And it is very important that when you see those notices and you're like, hey, wait, you missed one, please tell us. please tell us. Tell the alderperson, tell the zoning board. And one of our goals will be, as we shepherd this process to the best of our ability, to make sure that everyone has that information so they will know that these things are coming. I'm not gonna promise you it will be perfect, but I promise you that we would do our best to make sure that people are informed and no one gets caught off guard, because this needs to be something that works for as many people as possible. So, like Omar said, if you have a storefront that has been converted to residential, even if the zoning changes, you will still have the right to live in it because that is the use that it already had. And if you do not want your zoning to change, you will have the opportunity to protest that, and homeowners usually win. Okay?
Great, thank you so much. All right.
Hi, Sean Raciti. I live on Pershing and Western. Also, following up on the tax thing, that depends on how the assessor classes your property. So it may have been a commercial building previously, but if it's classed as residential, that classification shouldn't change in the zoning because it's based on the improvement of the property and how it's currently functioning. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the case. Now, personally, I would love to see B3 consistently throughout because that does provide the greatest opportunity for additional businesses. And I'm really opposed to any residential remaining on 35th because yes, we can say, as far as a zoning classification, not pre-existing use, but because we can say, well, you can always upzone it later, but we're right back where we started. You know, this downzoning happened almost 20 years ago, and we have the impediments in place that have restricted people from improving their properties and opening businesses here. And yes, we can maybe look at a mix of B2, B3. Personally, I would prefer the B3-2 all the way through, because as long as you have that special use designation within that zoning code, you can apply, and courts have determined that a special use is a permitted use. So no one's really necessarily going to be forced out if they're in a B3 and that home is pre-existing. But I would definitely challenge that the -2 is more conducive to affordable housing because the MLA absolutely misses that opportunity because you need 1,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. And that just means you're going to get bigger, more expensive units. But if you went to a -3, it now drops from 1,000 square feet of minimum lot area to 400. And that allows you to have cheaper, smaller apartments as of right, without having to go through the expensive process of getting another upzone, which is counterproductive to building out new affordable housing. So I definitely want to counter that point because the MLA is really still pretty restrictive under a -2 designation. Each Chicago lot's 3125 square feet, typical standards. So again, that limits you to a maximum of 2 units per lot, and that's if your lot is that typical size. That's all.
Hi, my name is Jake Berenson, Sean Racini's fiance. First off, I'd like to thank the 11th and 12th wards for bringing this meeting together and bringing everyone together. If we want to attract more businesses to 35th Street, in my opinion, the single number one most important thing we need to do is change the zoning, and that's just required for a lot of the buildings there because they don't have the right zoning. I sort of wanted to challenge the notion that 4 floors is too tall for 35th Street. So our neighborhood has a history of being surrounded by, or not surrounded, but flanked by a lot of tall industrial buildings, you know, some of them being 6 or 7 floors high. And in my opinion, if we want to try and stop gentrification, we need a place for people to move. We need to provide more units, and in a lot of cases, adding, you know, 1 floor, which might not be that noticeable in the long run, would help reduce the cost of some of these units that, you know, might get built, and would help keep costs low for people who are looking to move. And I mean, I bet you the last thing that we want to see is really expensive, like luxury condos or something going into the neighborhood, but that's a lot of times that's what we get if they can't build that many units. So, I mean, that was just sort of something that stuck in my head, and I just wanted to just sort of provide my comments. But again, thank you guys for bringing this meeting together and starting the process of upzoning back to 35th where it should be. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, do you want to ask the question?
So we're actually live streaming this at the moment, but David in the chat has a question. I gather from the slides and word of mouth in the neighborhood that there are buildings on 35th actually zoned for business that are vacant nonetheless. Is there any lever to pull to incentivize landlords to work with prospective businesses?
So David, thank you very much for asking that question. I don't know which owl is watching people, so I'm gonna turn around and face the crowd that's here. So that is the next part of this challenge, just to be thoroughly realistic about it. So like I said before, there are legal hurdles and there are social hurdles, because we're all dealing with humans, right? And the people who own these buildings have a variety of incentives. And some of them, frankly, are owned by people who don't live here, never wanted to live here, and they're just sitting on that property to collect the loss so that they can write off part of their whatever they own in Lincoln Park. All right, that's one reality. There are other people, like the owners of the former Pochos, who live in that building, and it is long paid for. And I'm not here to disparage them, but they have a different set of incentives, which is that they are older. It's an older couple. She is disabled. She's in a wheelchair. She was in a terrible accident a couple of years ago. And they just don't want to do the work of converting it. And while we've never wanted to see Pochos leave, you can also understand their side of the story, that they just have a different set of parameters. And so I think the zoning part, frankly, is going to be the easy part of this. And the next steps that we will do is we are going to need neighbors to talk to all of these landlords. We are going to have to identify every one of them and set up meetings and let them know what's going on and figure out what they want. What will it take? What do they need to do something with these properties? And it's going to be a different answer in all likelihood for every property. Like this is the shoe leather part of this job. And so I appreciate one person standing up and saying, I own a building on 35th Street. Thank you. Yeah, get your email before you leave. Because that's one that we don't have to go hunting. But I'd love to tell you there's an easy answer. There's not, because we're dealing with humans. And so I will say, if any of you know someone who owns a building on 35th Street, you know someone who wants to open a business on 35th Street, please make yourselves known to us. We want to connect people who can help each other out, and that's how this is going to happen. Alders, do you guys want to add anything from an official perspective?
I just want to add, like Sabrina isn't here today, but she's our business liaison, and when I was knocking doors, a lot of folks wanted like a chamber of commerce. I think that there's also a lot of leaders in our community that are looking to work together, and I feel like if we give them sort of the space to do that, they can bring in and work with each other and talk about how they built their business. Like, we need opportunities, and as alders, and I'll let Alderman Lee also speak, like, we need to advocate for the funding and the support through the city to also help first-time not home buyers, but storefronts. And so this is multifaceted. I think it includes everyone, and we're already doing the work, like whether it be with alders and organizations and businesses, and this is going to take time, but we're willing to do the work to build that. So.
Ditto what everybody else said. And I'll say too, I think there's a lot of resources from a federal and state perspective for small business development that has really gone untapped along 35th Street, along Halsted, throughout, I think, many places, many business districts in the 11th Ward and as well as the 12th Ward. So I'm thrilled to be here to have this discussion, and you've got our commitment to make sure that we're bringing the resources back, and we can do jointly some workshops, bring people in from well, from DPD. DPD also has these resources. Is this stretch of 35th on a TIF? I'm sorry, I should know this. Thank you. I really should know that, and like, bad on me, but I'm the first one to
I
admit
think
it.
there may be different TIF districts that apply to 35th.
Okay, so they're connected together. Okay. Thank you. Not on 30. We're gonna take a look to see where the TIFs are. We're missing not having done that because the TIF is important because we have small business improvement fund grants too. SPIF grants are specifically for businesses to improve, and those grants could be up to $250,000 for small businesses, but you have to be in a TIF district. Omar, am I saying anything out of line? Okay. I got a thumbs up for that one. I didn't know where the TIF was, but I know what it does. No, we've got to bring back those resources. We've got to bring those resources to bear, and I think that's something we can put next on our agenda and make sure that we're welcoming it. We have several groups actually. I know in the 11th ward that do small business development work, and we do work with the Chinese Mutual Aid Association, which is in Uptown, but they actually do small business development down here as well in Chinatown and Bridgeport. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to come over here.
Yeah, so yeah, it's the zoning is not the silver bullet. You know, there's so much more from the property owner's perspective, from other incentives that can come, you know, through the state and federal level. We actually have state representative here, Teresa Ma, who's actually a McKinley Park resident. So yeah, there's a lot that needs to happen to spur economic development. The zoning is just one component of that, and there's a lot that needs to happen. The lack of chamber of commerce, you know, that takes a lot of effort, more than just what a ward office can offer. We have very limited capacity, but we do have somebody that is on staff that's designated to help small businesses. So I just wanted to just mention that. So.
Can I just correct myself? There is TIF.
Yes, there is a TIF. There is a TIF on 35th Street. The Archer, it's on Archer 35th, and just to kind of explain what TIF is for everybody that doesn't know, TIF stands for Tax Increment Finance, and it's a levy, a property tax that is paid. It goes into a fund that is supposed to go towards economic development projects within that district. There's something what's called a SPIF program in many parts of the city within TIF districts. It stands for the Small Business Improvement Fund, and that fund can benefit small businesses that want to make physical improvements to their businesses. So that, yeah, I just wanted to explain some of those things that were just mentioned. So we'll just keep going on to public comment.
Hey, I'm Anthony. I live on Wolcott, just south of me. I'll be quick. I am not a zoning expert, so if I make any poor assumptions, it sounded like the gentleman over there is pretty well versed. But the only thing that I think, overall generally supportive of this, because we all participated in, sharing our vision in the McKinley plan, during the UIC study. There's that general want to just have a third place to go. When you're not at work, when you're not at home, you can go to a third place that you can enjoy being in the community. We can meet each other and talk with each other and have some drinks. Everybody, yeah, cheers. Anyway, so generally, very, very, supportive of that because that's what we need. But, how does development work in Chicago generally? And I just want us to just consider, potentialities, right? Of, taking a stretch of a street that hasn't been zoned a particular way for a very long time, suddenly, becomes zoned in a certain way. And again, we're at the whims of the market on this because that's how our society arranges how this thing is done. But how can we, disincentivize the type of potential tear down and rebuild of existing structures, or those tear downs and rebuilds of if somebody gets priced out of their single family and it just gets rebuilt as a 3-story condo. We can't just prevent that stuff from happening, but thinking about how can that be mitigated? Can we look to expand the zoning designation to more of the neighborhood maybe, and kind of spread that like demand out that might rush to 35th Street only, you know? Just things that I'm thinking about. It's like it's a limited space. There might be that rush that we saw in Pilsen, let's be quite honest. Thinking about development that is community focused. I don't know how we retain that, but I'm just thinking about, you know, the lack of control that we have truly when it comes to like who develops what and what they price it at. And we do have like higher height requirements too, because we're so near the train station and the bus station. So there's like, you could go even higher than what the base zone is.
Thank you, Anthony. So, we're running up on time. Eric, did you want to make a comment? Okay. Yeah, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We're gonna end at Eric if we have enough time. Yeah, and then if you still want to say something, we do have comment cards that you can fill out, or you can send us an email. The email address is at the bottom of that form. So, yep.
So I've got a couple things, but real quick, I think I generally more agree. I'm Mike Naughton, I live just south of 35th and Archer. I generally kind of agree with doing a more kind of blanket thing, as long as like special uses of, you know, non-conforming structures are allowed, which they are. So the people can live there and renovate their house and sell their house, and be chill, and that's all acceptable to B3. I think that's fine with me. I think like on top of, you know, we're talking about zoning of all these like different structures, but I'm wondering if we can also throw in some rezoning of some of the open spaces, particularly the one next to the library, which is apparently just a backyard for the library that's mostly always locked. What if that were zoned as a park? What if, you know, that little parking lot next to 35th and Archer that we were just talking about is also zoned as a park? Like, are those things that are allowed, and are those, you know, that aren't gonna like, you know, mess things up as they are, but will allow better use going forward, just of open spaces. And then I think the second question is probably more like a deep thing. Like, I don't really understand the liquor moratorium. Like, why was there a red line on Archer? Because it's like, that's confusing.
I'll answer that. So there's 2 types of liquor moratoriums. There's packaged goods, and then there's tavern. So the packaged goods moratorium was lifted on Archer, which is why there was only red, which is still covered under the tavern. It was lifted so that Cermak Produce could sell liquor. Alderman Cartmass. And then, so you can put it back after 1 year. So after the states that once the liquor moratorium is lifted, it can be put back in place after 1 year. And that 1 year period is about to come up.
His question really is though, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, why was there one ever there to begin with? Yeah, these things can all be lifted. I mean, so I think the short answer is, if there's a desire to talk to the alderwoman about that, because that's on her side of it. Look, I just looked at the liquor moratorium on Halsted between the 35th and 37th because of the Remote Theater. It's gonna have a brewery in it.
It's really important to know about that, because it also, you know, determines what type of licenses can be pulled for any particular type of business. Okay. What was the other question? Yeah, I mean, that's something that we can look at. I mean,
Depends on who owns the property. So this is being owned by the Chicago Public Library. And I think it has probably a little less to do with zoning at this point, I mean, than about ownership, right? So the library would have to, that's a conversation with the library, and I don't know who owns the parking lot over there. Is it CTA? CTA? Okay, so then that's a conversation with CTA, and that's something we can talk to them about.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tina Wong. I'm a longtime resident here in the project here. great person maybe that's how our neighborhood develops. I have a question, more just about like the history of why the 35th Street was like down zone in the first place, and you know what were they trying to achieve then, and you know what kind of like lessons can we learn from it so that we don't inadvertently convert to something, you know, maybe that was done for a reason back then. But I guess also along that line, I was also curious if there's going to be someone who can help us put together a more detailed analysis of the comparison between the two types of various types of zoning, so we could really understand the impact of why, or like, you know, if we choose one over the other, what really is it going to impact and what is it going to translate to reality? I'm curious about this kind of two-part question.
First question about the zoning. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about that 35th Street was downzoned by the 11th Ward. This part of 35th Street was represented by James Balser at the time. He put in a downzone. There's some theories as to why he did that, to only allow for residential uses. You know, maybe a bias towards pushing the shopping towards Bridgeport, and maybe not so much of allowing for businesses for, you know, the demographic of this neighborhood. So that's, you know, there are some theories as to why that happened.
And I'll just be fair to my predecessor, and he did downzone a lot. So there's no two ways about that. There was a lot of downzoning with this part of McKinley Park was still part of the 11th Ward. There's residential RS3 zoning on that stretch of Halsted between 35th and 37th, across the street from the Remova. So the idea, though, that this was to push all the business to Bridgeport with that same thing happening, I think is not accurate. My sense of it, and I'm speculating, but my sense of it, just based on this last year and a half that I've been in office and things that I've heard and seen, downzoning to residential gives you the most control. It's more about that person wanting to be able to decide what went where at any given point. Because that person, if you owned a commercial property, technically a commercial property because there was a business in it before it was downzoned, and you want to do anything to it, including sell it, to somebody who needs a permit to have a specific business in there, they'd have to come and sit down in front of you. So I think that the idea that upzoning is going to, it's going to send a signal that we're open for business, frankly. I think it's been unfair to the property owners who had their properties downzoned from a very obviously commercial district. To the question earlier about the special use, I would say if someone is if we were to reclassify some of the residential to B3-2 or B2-3, if what they want to do in terms of remodeling requires them to do a special use permit, there is cost associated with that too. I'm very cognizant, and like I'm concerned for the imposition of additional costs to individual property owners unnecessarily, because I've seen the reverse side of this, right? I've seen all the commercial properties that have been downzoned to residential, and we'd be doing the opposite sort of thing, which is why I'm sensitive to it. I'd love to hear from homeowners. I mean, we have, if you own a house, single family residential, because there are some, you know, I think those are some of the voices I'd like to hear from as well. But as far as lessons learned, you know, I think overall upzoning is the right thing to do. To which end, I think this is what this discussion is for. I think it's everything that I heard while I was knocking doors is people want a walkable neighborhood. They want that third place to go. I don't know where you are. Right, thank you for that. I'm gonna use it. That's all right. People want that third and fourth and fifth place to go to walk to, wherever you are. But to do that too, we need people to invest in the businesses who live here too. That question about the outsiders, how do we prevent that? We invest in our own community. That's what we've got to do, and we're going to bring resources so that we can help encourage people to start their own businesses. I have to tell you, it's very frustrating for me as an alderperson sometimes to be in some of these meetings and to hear like what everybody doesn't want there. But none of the people in the room are willing to invest in the community themselves. So my 2 cents about this, and I'm not trying to make a snide comment about anything other than If we want the kind of community that we want, we have to be prepared to work for it and to attract it here. So if you know people who want to invest and they're good people, bring them here. You know, and I think showing up to meetings like this makes all the difference too, because the worst thing that could happen is if there were 2 people in this meeting and we just did something without any other input about what people want for the community. So thank you for all the questions.
Thank you. So I think the question was about, like, so we kind of went over a lot of the detail about the different fees, and then Omar, you said that residential will still be allowed, and these people who live in the single family homes, if it was changed to B3, they still would be able to hold building permits if they want to rehab their house.
Could Omar give us an example of some things that typically go up in a place like that when
Sure.
it's up to 3 zones?
Very briefly though, because we're running on time.
So in B3 districts, you tend to see, like you mentioned, taverns, full bars are allowed, and that's probably going to be kind of one of the more common uses. In terms of bulk and density, the picture you showed in Avondale, like a 4-story small, apartment building, that's very typical of what you're going to see with like a -3 versus a -2, which is more typical of the existing typology on the street.
Like, would you see 3 flats? Would you see a grocery store? We're talking about like everyday stuff.
Gotcha, yeah. Grocery stores, yeah, all those kind of normal kinds of businesses, you're going to see both in B2 and B3. B3 is going to allow for a broader range of businesses, perhaps more nightlife. And yeah, 3 flats, I believe, would be allowed by right in B2 and B3. I think you would need a special use permit for that.
I think your table is very inclusive of like what is permitted, but I think what sort of kind of questions or the other concerns that we had about, what's going to happen to the value of the property and henceforth the property taxes, and then that kind of that additional layer I think is probably slightly as well. As far as public decision that's really been addressed in the first like this decision making.
Yeah, that's definitely, any questions you have, please put them on the comment cards, and then I think what will be beneficial is if we publish like an FAQ to kind of answer a lot of those questions.
Thanks. So I want to thank you all for having this meeting. It's just really nice and refreshing to have, have the opportunity to talk about what we want to have happen in our neighborhood. So thank you for that. Just a couple things I wanted to raise. They don't need to be answered now. One is, like, I'm generally in agreement with what folks are saying, that we want to sort of hold to some of the sort of character of 35th Street and not sort of be going too big or too high. But I do think that if we do that, one of the things that small businesses really need are customers. And we do then, as a neighborhood, need to make some decisions about where are the places where we want more denser housing to bring more residents into the neighborhood, because that's what really helps small businesses thrive, is having residents that can walk to them. And so we actually need to think about what are the spots where we're willing to go sort of denser or higher in the neighborhood that really help to offset places where we want to keep a Main Street character. So that's one thing I would put out. The second piece that I haven't given much thought to, but I'm wondering whether it's worth us thinking about, is how does kind of what we do on zoning on 35th Street sort of overlap with the fact that that all is also covered under the equitable transit-oriented development ordinance now, because the ordinance sort of expanded its footprint last year, and so there are things built into that ordinance that actually help around equity, affordability, and all of that. So it'd be worth thinking about how that sort of sets up against the zoning. Thanks.
Can you explain what that ordinance is?
Omar, do you want to talk about the ETOD?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not deeply familiar with the exact numbers, but when you have it's usually in a -3 zoning that you can take advantage of the transit-oriented development provisions, which allows for more density and height for areas that are well served by transit. And yes, there's less requirement for parking, and usually there's an affordable housing component as well. That's the equitable part of the ordinance.
A couple things I'd like to point out about that too. We are doing some work around ETOD separately. In fact, we have a committee. If you would like to be on it, we always need people. So if you want to see a more regular opportunity to know what's going on behind the scenes, we'd love to meet you. But one of the things I want to point out related to ETOD is that it does allow for denser housing uses. And since that topic has come up a couple of times tonight, I want to point out 2 legal parameters that we need to consider as we're talking about that. And one is that the ARO, which is the Affordable Housing Requirement, does not apply to buildings with fewer than 6 units. So in other words, there's a requirement that if a building is more than 6 unit, a certain percentage of them have to be set aside for people who make a particular percentage of Chicago's median income. That happens to be around or a little less than today's market rate in McKinley Park. So that puts us in an interesting position because unfortunately it's one number for the whole city. But on the other hand, that designation is for the long term, and it will get adjusted according to market conditions and the way that incomes change in the city. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to point out is we are waiting any day now, and Omar, I don't know if you have anything to tell us about the Pershing RFP, but we are waiting with bated breath to hear about whether or not the city will allow over 100 new units of housing on Pershing. And that will definitely change our conversation about where denser housing belongs in the neighborhood, because if we have new housing down there, then those people will hopefully be walking up to 35th Street for their everyday needs, and that would be a great start. So I just want to point out that there's some other factors, things that are already happening in the neighborhood that will play into this, but unfortunately they're all happening at once, so we're building the plane while we're flying it.
Omar was hoping nobody would ask that, but we will have more information about that. But that's actually a really great point, because we would have more residents and we can attract more people and support our local businesses if that was the case, that we did get those. So there is development that they haven't announced yet, but there was 3 people that wanted to develop a project over on Pershing, and so we'll find out news about that project soon. Yes.
So yeah, I guess we have one last comment.
I'll keep this quick. I'm Kevin O'Neill. I live at 36th and Western Boulevard, and I'm also a reporter for McKinley Park News, and that's wearing that hat. Suburbial next steps. What's going to happen over here next?
He hands it right to me.
You're close.
That's okay. I won't take it personally. Look, this is the first step in the conversation. I think there's comment cards, there's an email address. I believe we're gonna keep this comment period open for 2 weeks. We're gonna take all of the feedback, any additional questions, including the one about the assessor. We're gonna get some answers to those. We'll work together to develop an FAQ. And then I think we'll come up with a proposal that then we can present again to the community at that point. I mean,
Yeah, that's perfect. And then, we're working closely with MPDC. When's your next meeting?
So our next regular meeting will be in September.
Okay. We can continue these conversations through MPDC. I have board nights on Monday. So that'd be great. Okay, Monday nights, you guys can sit down. We can have maybe group discussions. But this is an ongoing process. And like Billy said, at least in the 12th ward, we will have a community zoning board. So this will be hopefully one of many of the conversations that we're having of zoning throughout all of the 12th.
What is the goal or the time frame for zoning to kind of change? Like, are we talking about months, are we talking about years, like what is sort of the?
I don't think we have a particular time, deadline in mind. I think we want to be thoughtful about it. So I think our inclination is not to rush the process. The city council is on a break in August, so nothing can be introduced, even if we decided tonight we wanted to do something, nothing can be introduced until September. And once something is introduced, it's gotta be introduced in the city council meeting, then the following month it goes to the zoning committee, it gets on the schedule, and then it gets considered for a vote. That's assuming a lot of things happen, so I think we're not in a rush. But I think we want to do this right, and I think we're not trying to drag our feet on this. I know that there was a piece of legislation that was introduced by Alderwoman Abarca when she was in office. That's not going anywhere. That's just kind of like in a holding pattern at this point, because that's what we get to do. So we've asked for that to be held in committee until we can figure out, do we want that to move forward, or do we want to rewrite something new? So it sounds like we want to rewrite something new, but we want to include everybody in this conversation. So I hope that answers your question. I want to be respectful of the people that work here because they want to close. They've been here all day. If you've got questions, see Billy here, see Carlos. Thank you all for coming.
Also, yeah, if you have comment cards, I can collect them, or you can give them to Esmeralda Montesinos from the 12th Ward staff.